Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com, setting the record straight about election fraud. President Trump is very worried about mail-in ballots for the upcoming election. He tweeted on June 22nd, "Because of mail-in ballots, 2020 will be the most rigged election in our nation's history, unless this stupidity is ended. We voted during World War I and World War II with no problem, but now they're using COVID in order to cheat by using mail-ins." I'm going to talk about mail-in fraud in a minute, but first I want to discuss the cheating which occurred during the previous two elections. The week before the 2016 election, the press was telling us that Hillary Clinton was going to blow Donald Trump away, and they had very respectable pollsters. Clinton vaults to a double-digit lead boosted by broad disapproval of Trump. And the week before the election, Hillary Clinton was so far ahead in the polls she didn't even bother to think about Donald Trump anymore. And then this was how the election turned out 2 weeks later. All of the red areas are counties which voted for Donald Trump. It was a blowout. All of this red area is what our fake press and fake pollsters described as broad disapproval for Trump. Also in 2016, I was in England during June for Brexit, and the pollsters there did exactly the same fraud. What the pollsters are doing is trying to demoralize conservatives by telling them that they have no chance of winning the election, hoping that they'll stay away from the polls. Obviously, the attempts to rig the election by the press and pollsters failed in 2016. This was a terrible disappointment to them, so they ramped up their tactics for the 2018 election. The 2018 election should have been a blowout win for the Republicans. This map shows all of the states which had Senate seats contested in the 2018 election. As you can see, the vast majority of seats which were contested were in Republican states. The economy was booming, and Republicans should have come out of that election with a huge gain in the Senate. But the Democrats in the deep state weren't going to allow that to happen. Last week, the pollster Rasmussen showed how the 2018 election was stolen by the Democrats via the Mueller-Russia collusion scam. The press, Mueller, and the Democrats working together generated 2 years of fake news about Russia collusion, and thus turned the election towards the Democrats. Here's how Rasmussen described it: the real Russian swindle. Evidence dribbling out now indicates Trump-Russia collusion was a politically designed and media-propelled fabrication. Relentlessly pushed and fake, it interfered with voter opinion, likely delivering the House to the Democrats in the 2018 midterms. The primary election interference wasn't from Russia. Rather, the interference came from Mueller and the press, who interfered with the election in order to turn it towards the Democrats. I was living in Arizona during the 2018 election. Jeff Flake retired, and his seat should have been an easy win for Republicans. The state's economy was booming, and Republicans should have won in a huge landslide. But 2 years of fake news from Mueller and the press tore down the president's standing and made it a close election. The election was between a code pink agitator and a war hero. This should have been an easy win for Republicans, and when the voting ended, Martha McSally, the Republican candidate, was clearly in the lead. But new absentee ballots kept appearing day after day. This went on for weeks. And then one day, a batch of absentee ballots from Maricopa County came in about 2-1 for Sinema, the Democrat. This was in Arizona's largest county, which had been voting slightly pro-Republican. Suddenly, one day it went 2-1 for Democrats. That put Sinema over the top in what certainly looked like mail-in fraud. But both of them ended up being senators anyway, because when John McCain died, Martha McSally took over his seat. And now President Trump wants to delay this year's election in order to prevent election fraud. The Democrats are using COVID as an excuse to push through mail-in balloting. The president believes that mail-in balloting is how Democrats are planning to steal the election. But both of Arizona's senators want the election to go on as planned. So let's look at what President Trump is worried about. Mail-in balloting makes fraud extremely easy. One obvious way to commit election fraud is to find voters who've died since the last election and whose names have not been removed from the election rolls, then simply make up fake ballots for them. And the other obvious way to commit election fraud through mail-in ballots is due to the fact that about half of people don't actually vote. If an insider can find out who hasn't actually voted by election day, then it's pretty straightforward to make up fake ballots for them. Remember that the 2018 Senate election in Arizona went on for weeks and was finally tipped to the Democrats by a very late box of ballots. President Trump is correct. Mail-in balloting opens up the gates for massive fraud. And any fraud which does occur will simply be covered up by the fake news, who will say, "We told you this was going to happen all along." President Trump is right to be concerned, and Toto is too. He thinks everyone should have to scratch him behind the ears before they have the opportunity to vote. When I was growing up in New Mexico during the 1960s, the Rio Arriba Democratic County boss, Emilio Naranjo, would stand outside the voting booth and pass out money for Democrat votes. Democrats are a little more subtle now, but they're still doing the same dirty tricks. Please remember to visit Toto on the web at realclimatescience.com. He's been pulling back the curtain on junk science and propaganda for a long time.